We experienced some technical difficulties in our lecture today in front of the class, and so I'm going to lecture here to myself, I guess, for those of you that missed class today. Yesterday we talked about important legislation that was passed during the Great Society, and we started with the Medicare Bill of 1965, and we're just going to continue with some other important laws that were passed during the time that Lyndon Johnson had his own administration. The first was the Highway Beautification Act, and we had talked about this a little bit before when we talked about the profile of Lyndon Johnson, specifically when we were visiting about Lady Bird Johnson. And this legislation, known as the Highway Beautification Act, was initiated by Lady Bird Johnson, and it called for the beautification of highways, which today you see signs that say that maybe a certain organization or church group or Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts clean up a certain section of the highway. That whole thing started with the Highway Beautification Act that was passed during the Great Society. Another maybe familiar term to you was the Housing and Urban Development Act, also known as HUD or HUD housings. The original law called for the construction of 250,000 low-rent, low-income housing units across the United States to help those individuals that were having a hard time finding places to live. And they were built on federal dollars, and the rent was determined by how much a person made. So you had to have a certain income or a lack of income, so to speak, that allowed you to move into these new construction units, and your rent was then based on how much you made monthly. This still goes on today. Actually, in Warland, we have HUD housing in town. I think there's some over by Sage Crossing maybe, whereas people can rent those, and the rent is still determined on the basis of their income. That HUD housing later went into low interest loans for people that couldn't afford to buy houses, to give them the opportunity, and those loans were usually assumable and were a positive thing to have if somebody wanted to sell their home. The third act I wanted to talk about was the Immigration Act. Now, prior to the Immigration Act, there was a quota system of allowing only so many people into the country per year. Well, Lyndon Johnson's passing of the Immigration Act abolished this quota system, so there was not a limit on the number of immigrants that could come into the United States. We then moved on to 1966 at a glance, and we started with January. On January 17th, an American B-52 bomber collided with a fuel resupply plane in midair off the coast of Spain. And during that collision, 8 of the 14 crew members were killed, and an H-bomb or hydrogen bomb was dislodged from the bomber and actually fell into the Atlantic Ocean, which presented a concern because of the radiation and a possible leak there. Immediately, the Pentagon dispatched planes and approximately 1,000 soldiers and sailors to look for that dislodged H-bomb in the ocean, to no avail. Well, on February 15th, Wilt Chamberlain, we've talked about him before, he was the man that scored 100 points in one NBA basketball game. Well, on February 15th of 1966, he broke the NBA career scoring record, surpassing a fellow up on the board up there that you can look later by the name of Bob Pettit. Bob Pettit had scored 20,880 points during his career. It took Bob Pettit 11 seasons to reach that pinnacle. It only took Chamberlain 7 seasons to break his record. Wilt Chamberlain's streak is still alive. He ranks 5th in scoring in the NBA even today with 31,419 points. But the note is that Bob Pettit's 20,880 points that he scored doesn't even put him in the top 25 today. So Wilt Chamberlain still being 5th is quite an accomplishment. In March of 23rd of 1966, we kind of go back to January, and that lost H-bomb was found by Navy diver Carl Brashear off the coast of Spain, intact with no radiation leak. Now, during the recovery operations, a line that was used for towing the bomb from the bottom of the ocean broke loose, causing a pipe to strike the leg of Carl Brashear, who had since been brought to the surface and had changed back into regular military uniform. Well, this pipe striking Brashear's left leg broke his leg just before the knee. Matter of fact, it was almost completely sheared off. He was evacuated to Torrejon Air Force Base in Spain, later was transported to the Naval Hospital in Virginia. And at that point, Brashear, because he wanted so desperately to earn the rank of master diver before he retired, convinced his doctors to amputate his leg because he could not continue in the Navy with a leg that was intact that wouldn't work. So they amputated his leg, he recovered and trained, and he remained as a Navy diver with a prosthetic leg and finally earned the rank of master diver, despite many people who did not want to see him do that, including those in the military. Brashear retired from the Navy in 1979 as a Master Chief Petty Officer and Master Diver. He died of respiratory failure in Virginia on July 25th, 2006 at the age of 76. And this movie right here, Men of Honor, is a very factual movie that was put out talking about this career life of Carl Brashear, who happened to be African American and who had a very tough time becoming a Navy diver in itself, besides being a master diver. You'll have to watch this. If you get an opportunity, you're bored some Saturday night at home, you think you have nothing to do, get on Netflix or whatever and watch Men of Honor. Great, great video. In April, on April 11th of 1966, Jack Nicklaus became the first golfer in history to win 2 consecutive Masters golf tournaments. That actually ties into history today, because today was the start of the 81st Masters golf tournament, and our old friend Arnold Palmer always traditionally hit off the first tee to open the tournament. He died last year, unfortunately, and today Jack Nicklaus, who we just talked about, and Gary Player, a very famous golfer from Britain, took Arnold's place and teed off today on the first tee to open the Masters. We will record a video for you to see on this, and also talk about Gary Player, who at the age of 80 yesterday in a par 3 tournament hit his 31st hole in one. On May 28, 1966, about 350,000 students seized control of the administration offices at the University of Chicago to protest the college's participation in the selective service. The selective service is where males at that time would be required to register for the draft in case we had a draft, and you did that by registering through the selective service. You could do that at the University of Chicago at the time, and because of controversy over the Vietnam War, students protested that and seized the administration offices at the University of Chicago. On June 13, 1966, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 in favor of convicted rapist Ernesto Miranda. Now, what had happened there is Miranda, when he was arrested for these rapes, they did not read him his constitutional rights, which prior to this date had no specific name. Because the Supreme Court ruling stated that confessions are invalid if obtained before a suspect has been informed of their constitutional rights, Miranda went free. From that point on, if a person gets arrested and they say, you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to an attorney, if you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Those are known today as your Miranda rights, which came from this Supreme Court decision on June 13, 1966. On July 19th of 1966, a tragedy, a man by the name of Richard F. Speck was identified as the mass murderer of 8 student nurses in Chicago. He was identified by a Filipino exchange student by the name of Corazon Amerso, who was the only survivor of the brutal assault upon the dormitory at the hospital where the nurses stayed. Miss Amerso escaped death by rolling under her bed during the attack and then making her way to a window ledge where she began screaming, "They are all dead. They are all dead. My friends are all dead. Oh God, I'm the only one alive." Speck, a 24-year-old ex-convict, was arrested in a hotel in Chicago, bleeding profusely from self-inflicted cuts on his right wrist and elbow, apparently trying to commit suicide after his hideous act. Another tragedy occurred just the next month. On August 1st, 1966, a fellow by the name of Charles Whitman, who was an architectural honors student at the University of Texas, made his way atop a 28-story clock tower at the University of Texas at Austin. He carried several rifles and handguns with him to the top of the clock tower and hundreds of rounds of ammunition. Whitman encountered a man, his wife, and their small boy in his route to the top of the clock tower. He shot and killed the woman and the boy, and the man managed to escape. Once Whitman was in position on top of the clock tower, the 25-year-old ex-Marine opened fire on the campus, killing 12 people and wounding 31 others. Finally, 96 minutes after he took his first shot atop the clock tower, he was killed by police. Ironically, prior to his arrival at the University of Texas campus that day, Whitman had already killed both his mother and his wife, sparing the life of his father because he hated him so much he wanted his father to live with the consequences of his actions. After his death on the top of the clock tower at the University of Texas, an autopsy was performed on Whitman, revealing that he was suffering from a brain tumor. In September 17th of 1966, Willie Mays of the San Francisco Giants hit his 535th home run. At the time, putting him in second place all-time of career home run hitters, behind only the famous Babe Ruth. On October 5th of 1966, which should be familiar to you, the Texas Court of Appeals overturned the conviction of Jack Ruby in the killing of Lee Harvey Oswald, and he was ordered a new trial, which unfortunately for Ruby, he did not live to experience. On November 8th of 1966, Ronald Wilson Reagan, the ruggedly handsome former movie star turned politician, was elected governor of California. The 55-year-old conservative Republican was successful in his first ever attempt at running for public office. And we all know that his election to the governorship of California would pave the way for his later election as President of the United States. And finally, on December 12th of 1966, bruised and weary, Francis Chichester was helped from ashore in Sydney, Australia. He had just completed the longest solo sea voyage in world history. He traveled 13,750 miles in just 107 days. The 65-year-old British adventurer and magazine publisher received a hero's welcome in his hometown of Plymouth, England, and stated to the people there that halfway through his journey he was ready to quit. But after swigging a glass of English beer, he vowed, "I shall go on." That was our lecture for today. Again, I'm sorry it wasn't in front of a crowd, but we had some technical difficulties. Tomorrow we will lecture on the Apollo space program.